Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
So here we are, number 110 in Sounding Shallows.
Gosh, that's a very big number.
It is, isn't it?
Yes. Wow. What can we sum up this week with? Each week seems to have something quite startling.
Well, I think seeing Kyrios smiling was one image that I remember. I have to say I really dislike antics on tennis courts, but I know him, poor fellow, has problems. But I thought the bit at the end where he and Djokovic said we decided the winner would buy the dinner, and that's why he lost.
It was so good.
And then they laughed again, and I was pleased about that.
I agree. There was some real kindness there, and I think maybe other people understand him a little bit more than it's easy to see, really. Yeah. Well, what else? Oh, I know what else. Other images, and the one in my mind is not the sudden smiling faces of all the Tory candidates for becoming the leader of the Tory party and the Prime Minister, because I don't know.
Well, it's wearying, to be honest.
Yes,
I mean,
that's what I was going to say.
The people who are actually human beings in their private lives move from one mode of total artificiality to another, depending on what the next thing is. And those who were going to be a leader have now stopped going to be a leader, and are now people who are wanting to be someone who is very important in the leader's cabinet. And people seem to be incapable of talking about things that mean anything. It reminds me of the church sometimes, where you have songs and stuff sometimes to cover up the difficulties.
Yeah.
It's madness, because people aren't stupid, really. No. Anyway, that's...
Well, I think it's all been absolutely overwhelmed by these images from the James Webb Telescope, hasn't it? You have seen them, haven't you?
Yeah, they were absolutely fantastic. Yeah, they were amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, the Hubble telescope was good, but this one, extraordinary.
Should we just quickly apologise to anyone in any other country who is bored stiff by hearing anything about British politicians? And
we'll keep going with the images. I mean, did you see the one of the star actually being born?
Yes, I did. It's hard to encompass in your head, but the one that staggered me was the picture of three galaxies, the light of which could only be seen now after billions of years of travel.
I know.
It's just mind-boggling. I could sat and looked at that for a long, long time.
Well, I think the thing that I thought was, so often once the scientific analysis of something comes in, it sort of loses, its mysticalness or loses its magic. But in this case, I think as well, we live in a world where everything is filtered or, has filters on it or is enhanced. But this is seeing more and more of the extraordinary truth of it, isn't it? More of these telescopes are just revealing more and more gloriousness.
What was it? They called it a dying star and a cosmic dance.
Yes. Yeah.
Really, really amazing. Yeah. I must say, when I was a child, you're saying it gets more complicated by the practical issues. But I remember as a child thinking, all this space thing is ridiculous. Surely you just get in your spaceship, sit at the steering wheel and drive towards the moon, or
that wouldn't be anything to do with Dan Dare in the Eagle.
I don't know. They were already up there. No, it was more simple things I loved about people getting in their spaceships and just drive. Anyway, this is staggering.
Yeah,
really
I think already there's no doubt that the more you think, the stranger and almost more frightening it can become. I remember as a young teenager sort of trying to imagine infinity and the idea of it, well, same as eternity really, but infinity going on and on and on and on. And there's that bit, isn't there, in Genesis where God takes Abraham. He says he took him out, didn't he? And he says he took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." And I can imagine Abraham just looking at them and think, well, of course I can't count them. How do you possibly begin? And then God saying to him, "So shall your offspring be." And now absolutely mind-boggling. 1 minute you're being told to count stars, which is impossible, and the next that you're told you're going to have a child, which is equally impossible because your wife is far too old.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary story, and I don't know if it's nowadays, but you'd say, apparently my children are going to be stars.
Well, weren't the tribes of Israel all called? I think they were referred to as stars.
I'm about to reveal our ignorance by adding the word "surely" to the end of sentences. Surely. I've no idea. I would say, though, that for me, the idea of eternity, of the universe, has always been a huge comfort.
Oh, that's interesting,
and
you see.
As a child, it was because you could go out into the garden and you could look up at the sky at night and you would know that regardless of what was happening on Earth and regardless of what anyone said about anything, there were billions of miles of space out there, more an eternity of space. That was the important thing, that seemed to say to me, anything is possible. And since I became a Christian, or it means more, because every now and then I if I get weighted down by the idea of ordinariness, I love ordinariness actually, but a particular kind of negative ordinariness, I look up at the sky again and I think whatever anybody says and however I feel, up there it goes on forever. And I find that like a little pillow for my head.
Well, that's interesting, because I was reading first of all, you know, when the Russian cosmonauts went into space in the 1950s, they were delighted to be able to report they didn't see God.
Yes, that's right.
And that they saw absolutely no evidence of creation
it's
whatsoever,
so naive, really,
which I think is faintly blinkered. But then there's this other guy I was reading. I'll read you a little bit, or you could, Adrian, of what he said. He was an astronaut who's apparently flown over 39 million kilometres in space, so I think he has the right to speak, really. But he said he could never understand the reasoning of these two cosmonauts, because he said the distances they travelled didn't begin to penetrate the vast vistas of the cosmos. None of us have gone anywhere. And then he says, "I've only touched the very edge." And he mentions the fact that the men who walked on the moon were only 400,000 kilometres from Earth, and actually so close that a radio message from NASA's Mission Control Center could reach them in 1 1/3 seconds. So I think he ended up feeling, we've just begun. The universe goes on and on and on. And I really liked, he was asked, do you have any special religious experience in space? And he said, well, actually, reading my Bible in Skylab was no different than reading it on Earth. But there was one small difference. The pages were a little easier to turn in that weightless environment.
I don't quite know what to say about that.
No, except that there's no doubt that for him, instead of feeling arrogant about being one of the people flying around in space, he was humbled by the fact that, as he says, he'd only just touched the very edge of it all.
Part of me likes the idea. I mean, it's only another bit of reality, isn't it? Being in the Skylab, it's remarkable for all sorts of reasons. But it's. I like the idea of him up there with his Bible, reading a few verses.
Yes, but also full of wonder.
Yeah.
And I know that people have said, looking down at Earth, they can't believe how beautiful it is.
We had a very nice email, didn't we, about wonder?
Oh, we did.
After our last recording, which we'll read most of it too, because
yes,
it's really touching, really. This lady says, "I've just remembered a moment of wonder which I experienced along with my class. One of the children brought in a mass of small tortoiseshell caterpillars, which he'd found on some stinging nettles, their food plant. He also sensibly brought in a bunch of nettles. We put them in a large tank and fed them each day with more nettles brought in by David. But David was proud.
Oh, yes.
Eventually they pupated and we had dozens of gold-coloured chrysalises hanging in the tank. One morning we went into the classroom and there were a couple of butterflies flying around. After everyone had seen them, we let them out through the window. Then, for a week or so, this happened each day, but on one morning in particular, we went in to find dozens of butterflies that had all emerged overnight. It was quite wondrous to behold. Of course, we invited other classes to see this amazing display before releasing them through an open window.
Yeah, and she added, didn't she, that it's clear to see why butterflies are regarded as a symbol of resurrection.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story, isn't it?
Absolutely, I'd love to have been there.
Something coming from almost nothing.
It did strike me, you know, one of the most famous little children's stories is the hungry caterpillar who ate through all sorts of things, including quite human food, whereas these sensible caterpillars were just eating nettles. And you remember we had an experience of having creatures that would only eat one thing.
Yes, we did. It was quite exciting at the time. I think I mentioned them in one of my books.
Really?
I fictionalised them, yes. They were Australian stick insects, and they were quite large stick insects, and they lived in a box where you could put bramble stalks into a little pot of water.
Yeah.
And you had to collect the bramble leaves every day.
I remember when we moved to Scargill House, there were no brambles that we could find, and then we finally found some in the churchyard, and we used to have to go down every day and cut a few more brambles off just to feed these two stick insects.
I should mention they were called
Rowan and Kimberley.
Rowan and Kimberley, because we knew two Australian children called Rowan and Kimberley.
We did.
And so Rowan and Kimberley were with us sometime. I got quite fond of them, actually.
They were amazing, because you could actually see them munching with their tiny little heads, if you remember. I know they were incredible, and because they were stick insects, they would create the most amazing shapes and hang in the most amazing ways from their brambles.
A lot of beer, though, didn't they?
No,
a lot of Fosters.
No, they did not. No, you can't manufacture that, can you? I can imagine this teacher thinking, well, that was wonderful, we'll try and do it again, and maybe it not quite working in the same way. And I was remembering a time when I really wanted to create some wonder for children. It was Easter. And I thought, well, if we make Easter gardens, we can really catch that feeling of Easter Sunday morning, and how amazing that would be. And I'll just read a little bit of it, because I was helping a rather motley crew of children make gardens. Now, these were children from quite a tough estate, and so, you know, they weren't necessarily used to making gardens. And it said if you didn't look at the huge pile of mud and chaos outside and only looked at the lines of foil containers, each containing grassy mounds, tiny wooden crosses made from split lolly sticks, and an assortment of flowers, you, like me, would have been enchanted. So that was lovely. And they sat in a little circle. And I was going to tell them, Adrian, the story of the resurrection and how wonderful it was. And there we are, where they had their little gardens. And I was feeling a bit smug. And then suddenly I heard a yell. And I looked up to see two of my little gardeners engaged in actually locked in combat, snarling at each other and slugging it out to the death. Yeah. So I abandoned Mary Magdalene to the mystery of who was that disguised gardener, and I rushed over and managed to prise them apart, which actually is never easy. In that sort of primary school, you learn early on how to grab tufts of your opponent's hair. Anyway, eventually they stood before me and gasping for breath, with tears furrowing the layers of garden mud on their faces. And Jamie said, "It's not fair, miss. He pinched my snail." He did what? As a reason for a duel, it had to be one of the strangest. "I had a snail, miss, in my garden, and he's pinched it. Look, it's in his garden now." And sure enough, Jamie's garden was snailless. and a small snail reposed in the adjacent foil container. So there was the evidence. But even Watson might have noticed the fine line of silvery slime crossing the path between the foil rims. Was the snail dead, Jamie, I asked. No, miss. Well, I think he may have walked onto Clive's garden, Jamie. Yeah, mine's better than yours, that's why, said Clive. And then obviously they both set to again, and I had to drag them back to the circle and carry on with the story and talk about the morning having lost its glow, Adrian.
I have to say that, Jesus would probably say he had a difficult 3 years, but he didn't have to tackle anything like that, did he? I mean, he had some difficult areas, but two small children, one of whom thought the other had stolen his snail.
Oh, well, it was...
No, wouldn't you love to know how he'd sorted that, though?
I would.
Would he have done
I would. I don't
know how
I think what struck me is that Mary would have understood, actually, because she understood reality. She knew real struggles, and she...
What, Jesus' mother, you mean?
No, I mean the Mary in the garden, because that was the story that we were going to be telling. No, we were going to be telling, the wonderful story about the gardener.
Yeah.
I was so fed up with it, really. And they took their gardens home, and I thought, we haven't managed it.
It's a very bad idea to assume your vision is going to be shared ever. Because it's your vision, and unless you've got a way of communicating it anyway.
I know. Well, I thought I had, in fairness, if it hadn't been for that snail.
But they are natural anarchists.
They are. Well, these two were anyway.
So, things don't always work out. I was just remembering a time which you will remember well, and which you should, with shame.
Adrian!
When we as a family were sitting on a bank over a river. I was walking along it was a stream, sort of large stream. You 3 or 4 were sitting up on this little bank bit, quite a way up. And I was walking along the stream and feeling this was an idyllic time, an idyllic moment walking through the stream. And suddenly, from your point of view, you saw me raise my arms and start waving them and
you were doing a wild
sprinting
dance
down the stream, and thought I must be in some sort of ecstasy of joy. In fact, it was hornets. Right. It was a hornet's nest, and I came up onto the bank, and I ran towards you, still slapping my own face.
We were laughing.
While you all laughed your heads off. Thank you very much. That was a very warm memory. That didn't work out too well.
No.
Really.
No. So, as we say, you can't manufacture wonder or special moments, really, or moments of total and absolute peace.
But sometimes there are serious times when it seriously goes, the joy, the wonder.
Oh, yeah.
One of the really good things, and those who write poetry will know, it can be, I was going to say therapeutic, but that sounds a bit too clinical. It can be very helpful to work your way through words. To bring meaning to what's happened. This is a poem I wrote ages ago about something that happened to me, and I was feeling very low and not at all sure where I was or what was going on or anything, and it wasn't helped by walking down one of our favourite walks and feeling it wasn't as I remembered it.
Oh yeah.
And this is what happened. It's called Winter. Well, no, it isn't. It's called When You Slept. Sorry. It's on the next page, not that page. So, this is it. When you slept. When you slept on the cushion in the boat, did you dream the walk we took, you and I, one autumn afternoon, from that little church at Lullington through Litlington to Alfriston, where ageless fields of flint and chalk fell seamlessly to merge and meet with green and violet shadows that were circling and embracing the Cathedral of the Downs. I was in terror of a storm that day. The red and gold flew and fluttered round our heads, brittle messages of loss and pain and death, and the surging valley side beyond us, once a way to rise, I suddenly discerned was nothing but a dumb and loveless wall. So sad to see familiar beauty, now a thing of ugliness. I dropped my gaze, you spoke a word, a firm command, into the centre of the raging storm. And when at last I raised my eyes, I saw, with grateful wonder that the splendour had returned.
I love that poem, Adrian. I mean, in a way that encapsulates so much, but it was a moment, and just listening to it, I was thinking, for some people who are struggling with depression, that loss of, I mean, what you're describing there is a sort of loss of the brightness, the taste of the world, if you like. And I remember, and I've met many people since, people who've been through very deep depression, that you can't make it, you can't be happy, you can't find it until a moment when you can.
Yeah,
and in your case, it was you felt that God was right in the middle of it.
Well, it was that there was a command in the middle of it, because normally we try and find ways to change, but I suppose it was the idea that, like with in the boat, when the disciples were frightened, Jesus stood up and commanded the storm to go down. And I certainly pray that for anyone who's going through it at the moment.
Yeah, just to finish with something really silly, I was thinking, something came into my mind, to infinity and beyond, and I realised that was not a profound utterance by any of these scientists, but it was Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story, who constantly sticks his arm up and says, to infinity and beyond.
Surely someone else must have said that.
So I thought maybe that Buzz Lightyear and God had something in common, I mean, to infinity and beyond.
Yeah.
I mean, we believe in a God, a creator God, who created this extraordinary infinity. Goodness knows how many years ago. Goodness knows how. But who else, what else could have created something like that?
I don't know, and I don't understand it, but like I said, I like infinity.
Yes.
I like going on forever.
Yes.
I like the clue, the hint that things will move on and forward, and there's enough space and time and clarity somewhere to make that okay for all the people who go through it. So
and that God tells us he loves us exactly where we are, and to infinity and beyond, which is an extraordinary promise, really.
I'll leave you with that tiny thought.
Well, it's better than the Hungry Caterpillar or Buzz Lightyear.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.